Inflato-Scape was an exploration of architecture, technology, economy, and other things that go into
Testing.
Big round of applause for Blessing Irish.
Was brilliant.
Heather's introductions are so great. And I just after class, and thanks for everybody who came from other places to be here.
Testing.
It's nice to have all these people here. Supposed to stand in the light.
Testing.
So I'm just going to talk about, I've actually spoken here about some other projects. And I told Edgar I'd say hi to him, because some people are watching it on ramp, and then also I think at UC Riverside. I'm going to just really talk about one project that I just finished called Inflato-Scape, and it's a creative sort of experimental art piece. So a lot of people here are design students of mine. I've invited them to be active and ask any questions on the spot. And I'm more than happy to share with you the things that I've pushed you on to think about as you develop projects that I thought about in developing this one. And it's great to just be able to have some time and talk about one project. This space is such a great resource for anybody working in the lab, because usually you look at things in the lab and you just Heather's introductions are so great. Who made it and whatnot. And I just after class, and thanks for everybody. I'm going to start off just by showing.
Testing.
Nice to have all these people here. Supposed to stand in the light.
Testing.
So I'm just going to talk about, I've actually spoken here about some other projects. And I told Edgar I'd say hi to him. And some people are watching it on ramp in many places in time. UC Riverside. I'm going to just really talk about one project that I just finished called Inflato-Scape, and it's a creative. Wow, that's me a minute ago. All right, thank you. I'm going to show you. Here. Something that is so different than what the project what it ended up being. But this is really conceptually how I started thinking about what the site is about. And this I started about 3 years ago, and I was so busy I had no time to make art, and I was driving all over the place. I was teaching up in Santa Barbara and starting this organization here in LA, and so the only time I could really think creatively was in my car. And to a certain extent that's still true. I've always made work about where I live to some degree. Where I live has a huge influence on me. And I really believe in the city, and I believe in things that nobody else is interested in, things that are like boring and banal and commonplace, I think are interesting. And this is a series of just photographs that I was taking driving around LA. This one's actually really close, of billboards, not the actual signage, but just the structures themselves. And the reason why these were interesting to me was thinking about them and thinking about them specifically to LA as a sort of form of weird architecture, not the kind of architecture that's glorious, that earns a lot of money, but that just sort of happens over time, and that's really in response to how people move through the city. So you have these sort of strange shapes and things popping out, or even ones where, like here, there's no more sign, and it's just this relic. And thinking about how we experience media in all these glossy, sexy forms, and then this is like, how long has this been here? It's never going to be used again. And it'll just sit there, who knows, until they tear the building down or whatnot, but there's this sort of ongoing relationship that LA has, both to media and architecture and how the city unfolds, especially in the sort of central, the older parts of Los Angeles, where no one's really paying attention. And I think, anyway, they just seemed really interesting to me. The contrast of what we think of as invisible, data, digital, instant, virtual, and then these weird structures that are actually really there, and how much longer we're going to really have telephone poles and billboards and things that are these funny, awkward, physical shapes. So that's sort of a tension between those two things, looking again at the things that nobody else thinks is interesting. So that was what I was like really interested in. I still drive around and wow, look at that. I went to Greece last year, and I was taking pictures of like all their antennas. Like, wow, it's really different than they are in LA. Like, not the, I mean, I did take a picture of the Parthenon too, but not the usual tourist photographs. And as I was doing this, these sort of started popping up. Still teaching at Santa Barbara, and we actually had a really great speaker here on Monday, and we were talking about the legacy of Buckminster Fuller, and they had the Buckminster Fuller Institute up there. And then again, this disjuncture between the sort of really idealistic utopian notions of what architecture and design is supposed to offer us. And now I'm sort of thinking the history of inflatable architecture and experimental architecture, and then really how we experience that now. So I had sort of been reading a little bit about, they had a great show maybe 2 years ago at Art Center on the group Archigram. And for maybe people that don't know, there's a group of British architects that would propose these incredible, like Instant City or cities underwater, or things that you could put together in 2 seconds. And it was about being able to reinvent our experience in the city. Okay, that's cool. For a lot of Buckminster Fuller's projects were really about meeting housing needs, and then thinking, you know, where is that? Where do we have that? You know, we have this, like inflatable gorillas selling shoes, but we don't have any of these other like inflatable houses that would do whatever. So anyway, and then I did another series looking at these, and then thinking about, again, that sort of irony and disjuncture. And then Inflato-Scape, I decided to actually make it a web project as I was thinking about the web as inflatable architecture. And taking the metaphor of what's inflatable and pulling it to all the different sort of, I guess, ideas that could come out of that. So let me bring it up. And, okay. We all know this routine, right? Before I forget, if anybody's here and you're on a connection that's not a fast one, actually this is great. I love when it's not perfect because, you know, as a designer, what tools do you choose to use? I decided to do the whole project in Macromedia Flash 5. When I started it, it was 4. But I did 5 because here you can install it super fast and get going, and it really doesn't take very long. A lot of other tools take a lot longer. Okay. We don't need that. And let's take away these. So Inflato-Scape is a web project, and a lot of the content is not just about this idea of architecture in the city, utopia, versus the sort of banality of what's developed out of that. But just the web itself and the idea of networks as architecture. And a lot of people are talking about this. A lot of architects are excited about nobody's building anything anymore, so they can do what they want to do on the web. Really sort of taking that that idea. What else do I want to say before we started? So other things I was thinking about as I started it were the web in terms of it being an economy. So anything that can be inflated. And a lot of what I thought of was really happening, you know, when the web started, everybody was like, this is going to, you know, erase the digital divide and bridge people, and we're going to be one big global family. And there was so much boosterism around what the web was supposed to do for us as a society. And I haven't seen that happen, even though I work with those issues of access and equity. And so I'm a little bit skeptical of that. And I just think there's again, how would you make architecture just out of boosterism? How would you make something just out of hot air? This whole idea of people here just, I feel like this is like an ongoing, like, lights on, and come in, lights on, yeah. People just sort of doing it themselves. So you buy an old house and you turn it into a storefront and then you paint it hot pink and then you want a rooster, and it's like this thing that you can do here in LA that you can't really do in other places. And sort of, I think the web mimics that idea of sort of a do-it-yourself architecture. So let's start. I want to say before we start that it is awfully large. The audio, all the audio is by a musician, who isn't here. That was an interesting collaboration to work with him. We had a lot of music started, but not finished, and so he was sort of developing them. And the movies themselves, they're all, like I said, and it's all interactive and sort of playful. I just wanted this to be about play and not about a big paper that you would read and talking up and down. It's divided into 6 different areas. I'm not going to show everything, but just tell you about a few of them. Progress, appendage, so I wanted it to have a feeling of being halfway. None of it's real. This isn't an inspection of information about architecture or the history of architecture. And that makes sense, but it's really just sort of a playing with all those things together.
These are forms that they could have taken if, for one reason or another, it had not become what we see today. In every age, someone, looking at it as it was, imagined a way of making it the ideal city. But while he constructed his miniature model, it was no longer the same as before, and what had been until yesterday a possible future became only a toy in a glass globe. Italo Calvino, Invisible Cities.
Looking for places where this is sort of a non-historical database of visionary architecture. And I think this is from the 20s, this is from the 1860s. Most of it has not been done. I didn't want to actually millennium data. It's so interesting to me. It's like millennium is such a already a year later it's been close to is it really anyway, so it took me a while to sort of gather these, but I wanted them to just sort of all exist in the same place on that side. This was a success, and this was the introduction to movies that relate.
Instead of being an object of privileged vision, the balloon was necessarily the visual property of everyone in the crowd. On the ground it was still, to some extent, an aristocratic spectacle. In the air it became democratic. The sense that the crowd was witnessing a liberating event inaugurated a free-floating future and gave them a kind of temporary fellowship in the open air.
This is an excerpt actually about the French Revolution, because that's when ballooning, I learned so much about ballooning. I never thought I would, like, who would ever have that opportunity? Was really when it was sort of became a popular thing. And a lot of these, this is obviously a Photoshop composited image, are from here in California, when there's sort of this, still this spirit of the cowboy and people coming in. And then all of these little links that you see in the sky are disasters that have taken place with specifically dirigibles and this idea of this becoming, there's the Hindenburg. I'm going to show you my favorite one, which is the sagging sausage. The voiceovers I actually had drama students from UCLA do, and They did such a great job.
Fast fall for a sagging sausage. Innocent of any practical knowledge of airships, American inventor John Morrill set out to make aviation history in Berkeley, California on May 23, 1908. At noon, Morrill, 3 photographers, and a 16-man crew clambered on board the walkway lashed below an airship shaped like a giant sausage and started its 5 automobile engines. Significantly, the man in charge of constructing the ship refused to join them. The launch was uneven, some line handlers letting go before others. The single-celled ship, much too long for its own strength, staggered crookedly at an altitude of 300 feet. The gas rushed to one end with such great pressure that the envelope burst, and as it fell, men, engines, and propellers were dumped into the watching crowd. Broken bones were abundant, but miraculously, no one was killed.
It's like, oh my God. What's so great is I just found this one image of it, and I was like, oh my God. And then later you keep digging and you find the story, and you can put it together. Let's see, which one should we look at next? Again, this is in my progress. There's actually an article in LA Weekly about Inflato-Scape burst with blimps, and I was so excited when I saw it, because I'm like, it's not just me. This is sort of like a little graveyard. I felt really bad. It took me a long time to actually get around to making this project, but in a way, it was good for me that it happened after the fall. I had more to work with.
Quality of graphic. Stability. Identifying object presence and quality of graphic.
There's a lot more that I could link, but...
Quality of production.
With the booming growth of the internet economy, warehouse construction has replaced more traditional commercial building structures. The edges of our cities are a seemingly endless pattern of heavy square warehouse structures where once there were green fields. But what happens to these concrete boxes after all the e-Taylor mergers and closings? Inflatable warehouse designs can accommodate projected e-commerce failures while still offering many of the advantages of a more traditional warehouse. Large inventory capacity, minimal middle management, strong data backbone. Should you ever need to close shop, just deflate your warehouse and relocate.
This is true, too. I was just reading an article about Cisco Systems, and they have all these big warehouses up in San Jose and Silicon Valley that are never going to be built or finished, and it's kind of a sad thing. But anyway, this is actually the one area of the market that inflatable architecture is really a stronghold, is warehouses. Appendage, I'm using that term thinking about
Being in an industrial area, the inflatable tower above the rooftops gave us the visibility we needed.
thinking about, again, that idea of adding on and sort of making your own architecture with photographs also, thinking about these appendages. And this one, a lot of the sound in the project is randomized. So these little cuties there's a one or two there fine. He's when he did all the 3D models, and these were actually output. Really simple line drawing, which was created out of a real sort of three-dimensional, visualized flat space.
We were hesitant with the cost at first, but the blue brought us instant results.
So every time you click,
We had the 21-foot multicolored hot air balloon-shaped inflatable for a 1-month period for our grand opening.
Needless to say, we have
and actually the concept for this is off of a real ballooning website.
Needless to say, we have booked the inflatable product next Thursday.
Of the beautiful and kind of pictures of. This one is thinking about those great little kid houses that they rent. And a lot of the ones I just wanted to find the foreground, the movement, of what the subject was.
We want to give you a quote on your own custom balloon. With a fan blowing heat to cool inside.
As the business core of the city diminishes through continued development of communication technologies, office space becomes increasingly unleased. At night, the area is desolate. The proposal is to transform the urban core into a temporary festival space. The conception of the structure is a pneumatic double-shelled and compartmentalized membrane that can be transported to different cities in pieces and then inflated to expand above the streets between the high-rises. At night, the membrane glows from the light of the events inside, providing light for the street spaces below. We are participating even while protected in this thin membrane from undesirables, indeed, the void itself.
I think we've already seen there's only two that are just linear pieces like this. This is actually a proposal that I found on the web. There's a Japanese corporation that actually holds a competition every year for proposals of how pneumatic structures can be used in city spaces. And it's odd because I don't know why they never do anything with it. But again, it's like we just want the ideas of this, how we could revitalize downtown LA by putting a big tube inside and having a party.
Inflation is a crowd phenomenon in the strictest and most concrete sense of the word. This process contains an urge to rapid and eliminate growth, which have been characterized as one of the most important and striking psychological attributes of the crowd. But here the growth negates itself. As the crowd grows, its unit becomes weaker and weaker. It is a double devaluation originating in a double identification. The individual feels depreciated because the unit on which he relied and with whom he had acquainted himself starts sliding. And the crowd feels depreciated because the mission is.
It's a book by Elias Canetti, who wrote a really amazing book called Clouds of Power back in the 60s. So again, now we've gotten into inflation and money.
Shown that the word million is ambiguous, standing for both a large sum of money and a large number of people, particularly the people inhabiting a modern city, and that one meaning passes into the other and feeds on it.
This is one of my favorite ones. This is actually a site outside of Zion in Utah. It's amazing. It's like cul-de-sacs with houses around it. I took this photograph of it. It was around when's it going to happen? It's just up there with the warehouses. This next one is actually I just saw in the LA Times they were profiling this. This is like a new way of mapping cities and our country and everything that happens. It's cluster-based marketing. So this is a map based on sort of a network node model of the demographics of the United States, not in terms of rich and poor, or white and black, or rural and urban, but based on consuming trends.
You have chosen rustic living. You have chosen rustic living. Chosen the affluentials.
So each one, like the Young Affluentials is a group that's tracked based on, if you go to Ralph's and they ask you your zip code. So this is the stuff that we're compiling, and you actually have maps. Like I was just looking at a map of my hometown. Not for all the reasons that you can map it, but just based on people that eat brie and then people that eat Velveeta. Like, what cheese do you like better? Like, that's the new map, Anyway, so this
You
is
have chosen Second City Blues.
anyway, and then each
You have chosen
section has sort of a
Urban
life
Chords.
thing. Like this is urban chorus.
You have chosen the Heartlanders.
Mr. Movie Phone Boys. What's wrong with that one?
My UCLA, my absence in TV, my track home, my corporate agency, my track home, my beatbox, my computer, my anonymous user, my computer, my Microsoft network, my buddies, my beatbox, my anonymous user, my absence in TV, my computer, my Microsoft network, my iOS future, my beatbox, my Burger King, my corporate merger, my utopia, my UCLA.
You guys know all these things. This is like, so just like, why this trend? My everything, just because you're interfacing with it, it's yours. And such a strange way of trying to have people care about something or feel like it's personal, but it's completely not. So a lot of, again, what I was thinking about is this this development of how globalism is changing the way we experience things. This is actually a map of an office network, and I'm not going to play you all the sound voiceovers, but it's sort of a Jersey accent of reading how populations are inflated and deflated to accommodate for population shifts.
Inflation, deflation,
I know. Again, just thinking of architecture as a form of history, so I'm trying to
Effectively added 15 floors to your business location.
bubble culture is the flip between objective and need.
The pneumatic object could turn modern urban disenfranchisement into a monumental spectacle. It gave a disproportionate figure to the undistinguished conditioning both of air and everyday life. It restored to the view the pneumatic triumph held in the invisibility of the commonplace.
just on a technical note, what's really nice about offering something in vectors is that you can make use of this idea of something breathing or moving or it's scalable, so you can print it, and those are the things that I was thinking of, all the things that I was thinking about that were kind of
Information economy. But the architects of the internet do. But the architects of the internet do. But the architects of the internet do. You may not understand bubble technology. How does it work? No doubt. Just enjoy. But the architects of the internet do. How does it work? We use bubbles to help optical networks.
One thing that is hard about doing a piece
The
like
next generation of modern technology will change the way you communicate with the world.
this, There's also whether or not they're going to play with these things.
And that's the heart of developing the Net Mobile into the next generation of
Deployment communities to carry out remarkable results in many applications, including the following. They can be inflated and deflated thousands of times. Consumers will mention the blimp's presence to another individual.
This mobile device will connect you to the internet.
You guys know when you send images and stuff, you're actually deflating your data. So just, I was wondering how that actually happens.
Algorithm used
So
by
this is the
zip
explanation of
times
it.
duplicated strings in the input data. Literals
So you can
or
sit here and
match
listen and
lengths are compressed
little data
with
chunk drawn.
one Huffman tree, and match distances are compressed with another tree. The trees are stored in a...
I have to show the antennas that Journey drew. Again, here's another one that's completely doesn't explain itself. Hoping people will click and wonder what's here for them. But this is sort of a build your own network. And the really beautiful, fancy satellite ones are from Tokyo, Japan. Some more commonplace from here. And if you wait long enough, you get Jersey. The last section is also based on a project that's at the Annenberg Center about dreams. This is probably the most wide open one, but again, thinking about space and weight as sort of a collective space.
Astronauts can't lie down to sleep. They can't put their head on a pillow unless they tie it to their cheek. Now all the fans in the bag hide inside. They blew too much air out of astronauts' noses, preventing sleep.
Done a brief sort of overview on it. This project actually was sort of, it was funded by the Creative Capital Project, which is a new artist program in New York, and it's really important that I talk about them because there's so few opportunities for people to just make something just for the sake of making it, especially for the web. There's a lot of shows up in museums now about digital culture and the web, and very little of it is really about the web or really about how we're using it. So either you do it and you stay up all night and you figure it out. On this, there was a lot of open source stuff that I did, but it was like my chance to figure out how to do this stuff, and then teaching forced me to figure out how to do some of this stuff. But it's really important that they actually give, it's very rare that they have individual artist grants, especially for new media. There's a small statement, but do you guys have any questions? I actually can show one more little while we're talking. Where did I put it? It's the other one. I haven't linked this yet because it's exclusively on the other site. Again, about being sort of That I have dreamed up. This, for me was just a way to get some of these ideas out and not be so explicit about it, but just have people play and have things sort of cross-pollinate. But it's not very interactive in terms of people coming together and really being in space together. It's really just coming to see what I've made. So the next phase of what I want to do with this is so kooky and weird. But I think would be really cool is the exact opposite of what this is, which is sort of a playful area that I've made. And it's really about finding a way to have other people make something that might be like this, but just in themselves. So the way I've envisioned it is a multi-user environment using three-dimensional objects and basing it on the metaphor of sort of a derelict downtown warehouse district where you have big balloons and sort of like really cheesy stuff. So not taking, usually multi-user environments or game environments give you like, oh wow, we're in the dungeon or we're in Fantasyland. What if we went to that place that nobody wants to go to, like this sort of rundown industrial neighborhood, and actually reinvented that space as a place to actually have a dialogue. So the idea is to actually have users join and advertise what they have to say. And what they have to say would relate to the idea of urbanism and architecture and technology, where those things meet. And it would basically be a game of survival. You would have to come and sort of stay inflated. Any balloon over time deflates. So if you make your balloon and then don't ever come back, you are sort of a saggy balloon, and then somebody else can grab it and steal your skin and add it onto themselves. So then they become this weird-shaped balloon. So each one is sort of responsible for advertising what they have to say. The way I'm envisioning it would be with flash and shockwave. And it would be sort of instantaneous updating. And the shapes would be, they would take a little bit longer, but you would be able to upload images and audio. And then text would be live, so you could change your message daily if you wanted to. And you would be in competition with the other balloons and balloons. And then you would have this sort of public that would be viewing this. So this would be a global space built on sort of a very localized space. And people would be able to sort of rate, this person, they're like so out of touch, what are they talking about? And people could sort of, just like with Amazon where people rate things, sort of gang up, and if you decide that somebody has no basis with reality, you could snip their strings and they would float off into Never Never Land and just sort of exist as this idea, again, thinking about idealism and how it actually becomes a reality or not. And then the fun part, I know it's so kooky, the fun part would be you would have a randomized instance of a sharp object. And again, you'd have to participate in this. So a lot of people talk about how do you build community on the web. I'm not interested in being on it just to be on it. I usually like having community here where you have a whole bunch of people that come and are together in a space looking at something or talking about something. But I think it is interesting the tension that we have between a globalized economy and what's happening locally. Like, what happens when we leave the space and we drive home? Like, what do we look at? What do we see? Who cares? Those are the things that I always want to bring back on to this abstracted virtual space. Anyway, so the randomized object would be a sharp, like a pin or a rock. So you could strategize and hurl your pin, like Alex, I don't like her balloon. And so slowly she would deflate, and then she would have to sort of re-pump herself back up. So again, it's like this power struggle over ideas. And I think so much of what's really interesting that's happening on the internet and the business world right now is a power struggle. You have the phone company trying to stay in existence. It could become irrelevant if they weren't fighting for your dollar and trying to get you to have DSL and being your service provider for all these other wireless gadgets. Because we're not going to have these telephone poles. The telephone is totally obsolete. So just thinking about it, doesn't matter if you're a big company or Napster, it's like one teenager could completely jeopardize the whole music industry. So thinking of a way to make architecture, make urban space out of a conversation, what would that look like? And what would it look like even in the goofiest, like, wow, there's a blimp, in the goofiest manifestation rather than being a little dwarf or a fighting ninja. And then the last part would be that you could also merge with other people that were like-minded. So let's say Journey and I are nearby and we are basically giving the same message. We could merge, just the way companies merge to survive. So over time, you would have a space that's not predetermined, and it's about a conversation that would develop in terms of how it looks. And so that's where I'm thinking of developing this. Again, a completely opposite strategy. Some of the same ideas. I have no idea how to make it. I'm trying to get a grant or something to do it. For this, it was kind of easy. It was just me and people that I thought could help and that were talented and helping out, but it was small. It was a small endeavor to do and just sort of time-consuming. But something that is an engine takes a lot more resources. And how do you do that? So. You guys came in late, so you're like, what is she talking about? So any questions I'd love to answer. Also, I don't know if, is there a way we can turn the projection off? I think I told people that online there's a Riverside class that they could email me a question. So I can bring that up, but I don't know if everybody wants to see that. Your question is, how does one do that? Well, it's a good question. I mean, what's the relationship between basically like, here's my idea, right? I'm going to shout it at you, and you better get it, and then nod your head, or else here's something that's kind of weird and funky and interesting, and how do you take that in? For me, it's towards the latter. I don't really like arcade shouts, so I'd prefer to have it. It does have ideas behind it, so that's why I decided I should talk about it a little bit. But it's not, this broadcast, because I could say, click here, right? And pretend that you're stupid and you wouldn't know, like, whoa, what's going on? It's like I move the mouse and then everything's, I really believe that better design makes trust that people are smart enough to figure things out. Or if you don't figure it out, let's say you go home and you go to bed and you sleep, and then you start dreaming of balloons, and you go on the freeway and you drive by and you're like, there's that gorilla, and like, what was she talking about? And then you go to your computer and it says my computer, and you're like, why does this have a relationship to that balloon? And your mind starts making those connections, not just me. You're welcome. It's a good question. It's also a good question. No, I actually had a very fine arts background. So when I was in college, I studied painting. Painting with a capital P, formalist, abstract painting was the thing. So I actually didn't do anything with media until after I graduated. And then I went back to school at the Art Institute in Chicago and started doing photography and video, and was working full time, and and then started doing stuff on the computer really in graduate school. So I was never a geek when I was little, and I actually say this a lot to young people. I never ever thought that I would be a computer person. I don't know what that means, but you know, like someone who's like coding or geeking out, or like, wow, look at this thing, you know, it works. And nobody that knows me ever thought that that would be the case. But for me, it was really about choosing the, you know, a lot of people say this, they choose the tools that are helpful for them to do whatever piece they want to do. And, you know, the reason why I left painting and went into other media is because I felt like the history of painting and what I knew that to be about just got to be too much. And it was like every stroke was like so much about what that stroke, you know, the history of whatever. So I kind of like the fact that we're making the history of the web. It's unfolding. So it's kind of a nightmare because there is no history to it and there's no market for it really. You know, how do you show something like this as an art piece? For the opening, we actually had it in Hollywood at a bar called the Knitting Factory. Have you guys ever been to the Knitting Factory? So there's like, yeah, it's like, you know, shows and stuff like that. And they have a row of computers and, I mean, it was fun. We projected it. You couldn't really hear a lot of the audio, but it was really great because you got a lot of people that weren't there to consume art coming. But even so, people were like, you know, are you making software for architects to, you know, inflate things? And I'm like, no, I'm just making this thing because it's interesting to me. So, and yeah, so I think it's sort of ripe with potential. Yeah, you know, I have to say, and somebody asked me this, I was talking at another group, I don't have any training in architecture at all. It's really an interest of mine. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was an architect, and he was saying, no, it's better that way because, again, that training of what that means and how you can envision things and your openness to how you can define things. Like, who says this is architecture, like this? Or people talk about the web as architecture. In a way, you're much more open to it. So I've been much more interested in it since I've been here in LA, but have always sort of had an interest in it. No, it wasn't really because of the web. I mean, I just remember always noticing what kind of an environment I was in. And we did a project, you know, at On-Ramp that was completely different. It was more of a documentary style, and it was investigating history and looking back and trying to figure out how a neighborhood was layered. So it was kind of some of the same interests, but in a really different format. And I've always loved old things or things that have been changed, or like, and then now even like really hideous things. I don't know, it gives me more of a creative energy to drive by, and what do I do when I see things that kind of depress me? It's like, make art out of it, you know? That's my new thing, is like, oh, look at all these like big box things. It's like, make art out of it, you know? So, thank you. Laura. Right. That's a great question, and I forgot to mention, it was a very conscious decision to only have everything be grayscale, and part of that was because when I originally thought of it, I wanted to blend what we think of as the future, like, wow, this is this new revolutionary idea that's going to happen, or else, oh, isn't it sad that this blew up, or failed, or was never built? Or here's something that we experience right now. I didn't want us to think of things in those terms. I wanted everything to cross over. So my idea was to have everything grayscale as sort of a way of having it be historically ambiguous. And it made it easy for me because every time I brought an image in, it didn't matter if it was like a little balloon that was here and now or an old photograph. in a way, they get to all live in Inflato-Scape. So that was that. And then once I made it, I thought, oh, it's so gray. And you got to have a little color. So that's why I had the orange sort of blotting out the rest of the web. And I think a lot of artists who are making projects online think about, the web doesn't have a very focused context. It can be anything, right? It can be for the government or for school or for artists or hackers, or the web isn't really for anybody. So how do you define your space as separate, And so much of the time we just stumble across something and it's like, oh, what's this? And why did they make it? And, how do you make a context? Whereas if you're in a museum, we know we're in the museum and it's really there. Other questions? Oh, I don't know if, I guess anybody with emails, I'll just send it back to them. Any other questions? I wish I did. I was thinking about that. There was somebody that was taking pictures, and I didn't get a chance to get them. But I'll post them up, because I think I'll do that. And again, it's sort of an experiment of a way to have something that's social. Because again, you could do something on the web, and then people see it, and then maybe they email you or they don't. But who knows? But it is pretty fun, I have to say, doing art on the web. You can track how many people are looking at it. I can see which areas they like the best, like which ones are the most popular, what time of day, people are looking at Inflato-Scape at 3 in the morning. That's cool. Things that you don't normally get to spy on people for. And then also, hey, Miss Green Galactic herself. This is Lynn. I'm just finishing up. So she's the one that actually has helped me with the publicity and organizing the Knitting Factory event. Do you have any, we were just talking about images of that event, and I was saying I should have brought some. Okay, one thing that I wanted to say that I have actually for anybody, but also as an idea, that every time you make a piece online, this has, it's in Flash, it doesn't take that long, but it's a lot of audio, and you can't really see it that well on a modem. And again, thinking about a lot of even people we work with at on-ramp don't even have computers, and how do you make something like this the way you want it, but still accessible? And so I made little tiny CD versions of it too, and it has actually better quality audio on these. So if anybody doesn't have a fast connection, you're welcome to take one. But it's a way of trying to think about how to make it high and sort of accessible at the same time. What? Yeah, they're like business card size. So a lot of people make these for, instead of business cards, they put their movies and stuff like that on. So, any geeky design, techie questions? Yeah?
This is a huge magnitude of size for a project. How do you approach something like this? Is something that, you've been saying this, how do you come up with the idea and the concept? But as you went through the process, how did it grow? How do you visualize everything? Do you went through the time as your circumstances changes, your concept evolve with it? How do you?
Right.
How?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I'm still working on that. It's whenever you have to actually, I had to write a grant, so I had to explain myself in some coherent fashion and say, here's my idea, this is why I think it's relevant. These are the tools that I'll use, and so it's sort of a general map of how you might do it. But in general, once you start doing something, it took me a year just thinking about it and gathering images and hearing other people's lectures and seeing what's going on in mainstream culture and how are people talking about it. And I also got held up doing another project. So for me, I don't know, I had to map it out. and group it the way I was thinking about it. That's why I had to sort of group it into 6 different things. It gave me some kind of a structure. And I think we're talking about interface. The interface for the site itself is pretty straightforward. You know, it's like a button and it's in categories. We don't really know what we're going to get or why we'd click on it, but because the rest of it's much more experimental and playful. I started making the movies and would work on it and then be like, oh, and then put it down and then work on another one and I would just sort of know, like, this is lame, it's not done yet. And then the composer would come by and I'm like, this is lame, just, you know, it's not done yet, it's almost there, but this is the idea and maybe the kind of feeling to it. And then he would work on it and then I would develop it a little bit more. So it was almost like painting where you're just doing layers and layers. And that's the way I was working on it. And I didn't have a vision for the whole site. The vision that I had was much more traditional of how we think of a cityscape, where you'd interact with a cityscape. But then I realized that so much of what I was thinking about didn't relate to that idea, that I just wanted it to be almost a nothing space, even though it's supposed to be a scape, like a place. And then I actually made it in a very short amount of time, just since December. So I had some time and I was like, I'm going to make this project or kill myself, you know, because it had been going on for so long. And again, you know, you always have this thing of technology changes, the tools change. Do you know what you're doing as you're doing it? You don't know. I mean, Flash 5 just came out in the fall. I'm like, oh, and then there's this whole new stuff I can do. And there's always that balance of trying to figure out how to do it and then what you're going to do. So I also spent a lot of time just goofing off and making ugly, stupid things that I just would figure out how to do something. So I don't know, it was sort of unfolding. You know, and then you have to get it out there and see what people think. And then now I'm, you know, like, critical of what it's not. Like, it is all the things that I wanted it to be, but now I'm ready for phase 2 and to envelop that part of it where it's out of my control and it's more of a concept that other people make. So again, you can't do everything at once, you know. So,
Where do you get the images, or do you draw the images yourself, or do you get them from mechanical?
Actually, a lot of things, like this one, Journey, who was sitting here, traced, so he drew on top of a photograph. So this was like, you know, like a minimal. And then he traced on top of it, so it's like a new drawing that gives it more of a soft quality, and a lot of it's translucent. The same thing with the things on the top. The photographs, I had to go to the library and research and find them. Some of them I found on the web, but, and then some of the models were made, and some of it was just drawn. These backgrounds, the sort of network bodies were made off of 3D models. So it's kind of a lot of different things. Yeah. Did anybody else have a question? How did I get the what?
The labels for the small.
Oh, these, you can just send them out and they make it for you. And they're so cute. It's 50 megabytes. And you have to plan a lot of time in advance, like a month, because then it's cheap. I paid more because I was in a rush. So it pays to be sort of prepared. But they do it for you, and then I think they have places that will send them to you also. So, well, thank you guys so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. I'm here if anybody has any other questions or comments.